Alrighty, hey everyone. I cannot believe another year of the series is already over. 2024 just flew by. I don't know about you all. This year has been an emotional roller coaster for me, to say the least. But this series and being able to work with you all and getting volunteers more engaged in our programs has really helped me through some dark times this year. So I just want to take this time to thank you all so much for all of your support and well wishes. For our first time attendees, where have you been all year? But no, besides that, just kidding. My name is Sydney Enns, and I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement at the Tennessee Department of Disability and Aging. We've been doing this series for about 5 years now, and all the presentations from all the way back to January 2020 through last month are posted on the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disabilities YouTube channel. So if you're interested in checking out anything that we've done in the past, please feel free to go over there. By the end of the day tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow morning, but I'm giving myself a little bit of time, I'll have this presentation recording posted along with a follow-up email with the session resources to everyone who registered. I do want to do my typical disclaimer that these webinars are being recorded, so please be sure to keep information confidential when we're talking about specific volunteers or clients or partners in the community. Please be sure to put yourself on mute to reduce any background noise out of respect for our speaker. If I hear any noise, I'm going to mute any of those participants, and then you all will not be able to unmute yourselves. So please kind of patrol that so I don't silence you, because I don't want to silence anyone. Now is also the time to turn off your camera unless you want your face recorded. Totally up to you. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type those into the chat box and we'll address them as quickly as we can. To make sure everyone knows where the chat box is, do me a favor and type your name and where you're from, just so we can get a feel for who's on the call with us today, if you don't mind. We also like to use the reaction function to give our presenters some feedback through the presentation and also to stay engaged in the discussion. So using those reaction buttons, they're toward the top of your screen, over by where the chat box is. Give us an emotion. Tell us how you're feeling today. I'm going to give a laugh because there's been it's been a pretty comical day. There's been some fun things happening. It's also important to remember that everything we talk about on these webinars is not a requirement for you to implement in your programs. These are simply best practices through research and experience. However, if you do like what you hear and you want to implement a suggestion or strategy, please be sure to have the support of your supervisor or your management before moving forward. You all may recognize Kathy's name in this presentation from earlier in the year, and I want to truly thank Kathy for being so flexible in rescheduling her session from when my dad was sick earlier this year in the hospital. The volunteer partner or staff and partnership is such a key component to a successful volunteer program, and I'm excited to hear all the great information that Kathy has to share with us. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker to introduce herself and start our discussion. So everyone, please join me with the applause reaction in welcoming Kathy to the series. Kathy, thank you so much for being with us today and speaking with the group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney. It is really my pleasure to be here. I love volunteers, and I suspect that everybody on this call loves volunteers. And so it's so exciting for me to be with such a great group of really volunteer experts. I'm loving the chat, seeing where you guys are all from, what organizations. So really my delight to be with you today and to have hopefully facilitate just a dialogue about the volunteer staff partnership. So my name is Kathy Oakes. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a strategic director for volunteer engagement at the American Cancer Society. I've been with the ACS nearly 20 years. I started when I was 3 years old, as you can tell, and I have worked in volunteer engagement for the last 8 or so years. I am based in Lubbock, Texas. And I like to say that I myself am a professional volunteer. I volunteer with the Junior League, with the PTO at my children's school. I'm on the board at Ballet Lubbock, and I serve with our local American Cancer Society Cattle Barons Ball as a volunteer as well. And I think my favorite volunteer role is serving as the bylaws chair for my local junior league, which I did 2 terms of, which just tells you how nerdy I am about volunteer stuff. So as we get started, I would love to hear you put in the chat, what's your favorite volunteer role? Have you volunteered before, and what is your most favorite way that you like to volunteer? There's so many cool different things that people are doing in their communities, and I always think it's fun to learn about what volunteer opportunities are out there. So I'd love to hear how you like to volunteer. So today we're going to be talking about the Volunteer Staff Partnership and really how the American Cancer Society does it and why it's so important. I want to talk through what a successful staff partnership looks like, how we can incorporate a volunteer staff partnership at all levels of our organizations or programs or events, how we set up a volunteer staff partnership for success, and then share with you some tools and resources that I have found helpful. I'm loving reading all these responses in the chat as well. Hospice, anything with children, another junior league member. I love to see that. Pet therapy, food banks. So many amazing ways that you guys are serving as volunteers, but what a joy and a gift to also be a staff partner as well. I also want to give a shout out on the phone. My partner in crime at the American Cancer Society, Michelle Brady, is listening and cheering us on today. So if she sees anything in the chat, she's my second in command. Really, I'm her second in command, I feel like. So you may be seeing some additional tools and resources from my partner, Michelle. So before we get started, I would love for you to rate yourself on how well you think you or your program or your organization does the volunteer staff partnership. So there's 6 questions on the board. Give yourself 1 point for every yes answer. So, do you have leadership volunteers at every level and program of your organization? Give yourself 1 point for yes. Do you have a career path from entry level to mid-level to leadership volunteer at your organization? Do you have a clear path and process for when volunteer relationships become tricky? Maybe those challenging conversations. Does every member of your staff team have a volunteer or a volunteer group that they are accountable to and partner with? Volunteers in your organization, are they valued as strategic partners and not just operational or transactional partners? And do volunteers and staff at your organization have a formalized volunteer partnership agreement? Good questions. Six questions. How many points did you score? I want to see it. Put it in the chat. And listen, this is a judgment-free zone. We are all here to learn together. So whether if you scored 0 points, 1 points, 5 points, 6 points, I would love for this session to really be able to provide some ways, hopefully, for you to strengthen both the depth and breadth of your volunteer staff partnership at your organization. Don't be scared or intimidated that we're the American Cancer Society. We know we're a behemoth, but the foundation of the volunteer staff partnership and how we work here at the American Cancer Society, I think is really relevant to all kinds of volunteer programs, whether you are a small shop of, maybe just a couple or a couple of dozen staff members and volunteers, or if you're something as large as the American Cancer Society. So we're all learning together. Volunteer engagement is really for everybody, no matter how large or small your organization is. And like I said, I hope that we find ways together for you to strengthen the volunteer staff partnership that you have at your organization. So along the way, you're going to be seeing some of my volunteers, and I'd like to share some stories with you because, as I said, they're just the joy of my life, and I'm sure you can all relate to that working with volunteers. So here at American Cancer Society, the volunteer staff partnership is not just a relationship, it's really a culture. It's a way that we do business here, and I think it is really part of the reason for our more than 110-year success and legacy as an organization. The volunteer staff partnership is, yes, that relationship between volunteers and staff, but it also means that there's accountability in that partnership. It also means that staff and volunteers have different roles, but equal responsibilities. We work with volunteers where we are true partners. We as staff don't make decisions without volunteer input, and our volunteers don't act without staff member guidance. So when we think about the volunteer staff partnership and this culture of partnership here at the ACS, we like to say that staff provides subject matter expertise on the organization's history, policies, and goals, while volunteers really provide expertise on the who to involve and how to mobilize across a community or a geography or a program or event. We know that staff can't possibly be everywhere and know everyone. And if we had to pay consultants to do the work of volunteers, we wouldn't have any money left for our missions, no matter what they are. And so that's why it's so critical to empower and engage volunteers in partnership at every level of the organization. So our kind of tagline, our byline is staff are the what, and volunteers at ACS are the who and the how. And so over here on the right, you've got one of my volunteers, Emily from New York, obviously my most favorite volunteer. And I really love what she said about different lenses that are unique to the volunteer and the staff roles. And we're going to get into that a little bit more as we progress today. So why is the volunteer staff partnership important? First, I want to ask you a question. Put this person in your mind as I ask these questions. Who is the best connector you know? Who is the best salesperson you know? The person that could sell you the shirt off your very own back and make you happy to buy it. Who's the best cheerleader you know and the best advocate for your organization? Think about this person. Get this person in your brain. I want you to visualize them. Hey, we got it? Chances are that person is probably not you. It's probably not even another staff person in your organization. It may honestly not even be a volunteer in the traditional sense of the word. But whoever that person is, imagine if we could harness that passion, that connection, and that cheerleading and that advocacy work in support of our missions. And that's why volunteers are so critical to what we do. Volunteers, I always say, are the strongest asset of a nonprofit. And they're, of course, what set us apart from for-profit companies. Volunteers obviously bring their time, talent, network, and treasure, but they also bring their expertise, their unique skills, their professional experiences, their knowledge, and their perspective. I remember being a baby staff a million years ago when we like rode covered wagons and horses, basically. My manager at the time told me, your volunteers will teach you how to do your job. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the volunteer staff partnership is whenever I don't know how to do something or I'm not sure what's the best approach, like what do I do next? What's the next right step here? I call a volunteer. The volunteer that you're looking at here, Zach from New York, has a great quote there. But what I want you to know about Zach is that we are piloting a specific piece of software here at ACS. And Zach is actually serving as our volunteer project manager. Yeah, we have staff project managers for this pilot. But Zach is an IT professional by training. He's a longtime ACS volunteer, and he has stepped in to really provide strategic leadership for this pilot project so that he can use his professional skills and experience and really that volunteer lens in piloting the software program that we're working on. So he has an equal seat at the table to a lot of our staff members and some of our IT professionals and our project managers. And so he's able to lend us not only that skills-based volunteerism, we know about that, but also he's able to give us his perspective as a volunteer and say, this is what's important to volunteers. And this is how we keep the lens and the voice of the volunteer in everything we do. In addition to that skills-based volunteerism, Zach does really traditional volunteerism for us. He sits on his local board. He fundraises for his local fundraising events. But by really leaning into this volunteer staff partnership with him and treating him as an equal member of our team, we are able to strategically leverage his expertise in an even greater way than we were able to before. So I feel like an important part of the volunteer staff partnership culture, again, not just a relationship, but also that culture, is that at every level, for every program and event, there are volunteers and staff working together in accountability and in partnership. And this can function in a leadership hierarchy. I, as a volunteer, as a staff partner, may manage a leadership volunteer or a couple of leadership volunteers, and we have that very close one-to-one relationship. Then we also have, kind of a mid-level, a coordination volunteer that maybe manages other volunteers. I think that's really the key here. I still have a partnership with those volunteers that are being managed by my volunteers. It's maybe not just a one-to-one, it's maybe a one to several. And then those volunteers can go on and manage or supervise or engage, the volunteer workforce, whether that's fundraisers, program volunteers that serve our clients or whatever that is. I still have accountability and partnership to all of those volunteers, even though I may not directly work with each one of those. But we are working in partnership together, even if we're doing that through the use and the leverage of other strategic volunteers. So you'll see up at the top of the screen, 1 to 419. Here at American Cancer Society, our ratio of staff to volunteers is 1 staff member for every 419 volunteers. I know that feels like a lot. This includes everybody from our national board members to our day of event volunteers to our event participants. There's obviously no way that we love volunteers, though I do. There's no way that I could directly manage 419 volunteers every day or probably even every year. And so we rely on volunteers to help manage those relationships and do some of that direct management of those volunteers so that we can be representatives. We can use those volunteers to represent in that one-to-many relationship. And so even though I may not work directly with fundraising volunteers or event participants or program volunteers, I have a close relationship with their volunteer leaders, their leadership volunteers that are the leaders of those programs. They're strategically giving us their time, talent, treasure, experience, expertise, knowledge, all of that stuff. And then they are able to also, as I mentioned, bring that perspective and that voice to the other volunteers that are kind of in that hierarchy. I'll also say about this is why a volunteer career path is really important. You and your volunteer managers can identify the best entry-level volunteers, the best that you've got out of that volunteer workforce, whether they're serving clients or they are fundraising, they're helping out at events or programs, whatever that looks like. You can identify the very best and sort of promote them into this mid-level tier of coordination volunteers where they can be managing other volunteers. And then you can have that closer relationship to them. Then you can do the same thing when you've got these mid-level volunteers. You can then promote them up into a higher leadership level where you've got that even closer one-to-one relationship. And really utilize their knowledge and expertise and skills in a more strategic way. So where I see people missing the boat on the volunteer staff partnership is not at the top and it's not at the bottom. It's really this idea that we can trust volunteers to do the work in the middle, that we can trust them to be strategic partners, that we can empower them to lead and guide other volunteers, and that it's, that we can have that one to several relationship so that we can get even more work done faster. And I think where we, where we have the opportunity as nonprofit and volunteer professionals to really enhance the volunteer programs of our organization is by creating kind of that mid-level volunteer role. I love the idea of having an entry-level role that a volunteer, maybe they've never engaged with us before, but they need something quick and easy to build affinity between themselves and their volunteer work and the organization. So we have lots of those roles. We have lots of leadership volunteers, right? Maybe we've got a leadership board, a governing board, or a strategic work group. But again, where I think we could all do a better job is being able to promote those volunteers from the volunteer workforce up into sort of a mid-level and then on to being a leadership volunteer for us where they can really help us build the strategy and the future of our organizations. And so this is really how we rely on that culture of the volunteer staff partnership and not just that relationship, but it's really the understanding and the expectation that every volunteer has a staff partner, even if they don't necessarily see them or work with them every day, and that every staff partner is accountable and responsible to the volunteers that they work with, even if that's indirectly. So I saw some big wow reactions there, but I want you to feel like this is scalable, like it's attainable, and like it's something that you can implement in your organization as well. So you may be thinking, but I could never, I could never utilize a volunteer in a strategic role. I'm scared to use volunteers to manage other volunteers, but I'm here to tell you, you can and you should. And it's really based on very clear expectations, trust, which is key, and effective management. And I think the real magic of a successful volunteer staff partnership culture is really the difference between volunteer management and volunteer engagement. So when we are managing volunteers, we are managing the work that they're doing. We are making sure that, they are serving the clients, they are delivering the products, they are raising the money, whatever it is that you have your volunteers doing. But when you can elevate your culture into really a volunteer staff partnership, that's where the magic happens. That's where we really get into volunteer engagement. So Kathleen, the volunteer that's on the screen now, yeah, absolutely. She loves raising money for us. She loves being our advocate and our cheerleader in her community. But she is also such a significant strategic partner for us. We have been able, under her leadership and under her guidance, to really implement some really fantastic things in the realm of volunteer engagement. She was on a strategic work group for the past few years that helped us develop a national and enterprise-wide evaluation tool for our area boards. And that came straight from the knowledge and the expertise and the skills that Kathleen and her other volunteers have lent to us to be able to develop such a thing. It's not something that I, as a staff partner, could have ever done on my own. We really relied on all of these volunteers to bring their expertise, to say, this is what's working at the local community. This is where we're having challenges. And so it really is that idea that we are engaging volunteers in our mission and not just including them. Volunteers are an equal seat at our table. So when we talk about what does a volunteer staff partnership culture look like, these are some examples that we like to use here at the American Cancer Society. So at the governing board, our volunteers are really responsible to help determine our enterprise goals and objectives. Their staff partners provide information, data, and organizational expertise. But together, those volunteers and staff determine the strategy for the organization. You probably all have a board of directors, and that's probably pretty familiar to you, right? That the staff and the board work together to determine what's that strategy. But then, one step below that, leadership volunteers. And again, I think this is where we could all do a better job and really elevate this program of work. We can rely on volunteer leaders to plan and lead meetings, to do programs, to do training sessions, to help us develop strategies and tactics at the community or program level. And as staff, we can be here to provide information, materials, and resources. But together, we all represent the organization. Our community volunteers provide community connections and subject matter expertise. They understand kind of the politics and the dynamics of a community or a program or an event. And we as staff can be here to provide goals and best practices and guidelines for how to implement some of those things. But together, we all engage the community. Our service volunteers deliver services to clients, whether that's, food bags or pet care, driving cancer patients to treatment in the case of the American Cancer Society. Their staff partners provide those program guidelines, those expectations, and make sure that we have clear duties and responsibilities. But together, we all serve clients. And all volunteers, no matter what role they're in or what level of the organization, can champion the work of the organization. And we as staff partners can provide updates and talking points and make sure that they have everything that they need to be that champion. And then together, we all work together to promote the organization. So you can see that when we talk about the volunteer staff partnership and really this culture, there are volunteer duties and there are staff duties. There in some ways is some crossover, but really they are pretty unique and pretty distinct. So think about what I said at the beginning, that staff are the what and our volunteers are the who and the why. And I think we really see that play out when we look at something like this. Volunteers are, again, telling us how to do our jobs. They are telling us how to be a better manager, how to provide better information to them. And then we then have the responsibility to lead and empower those volunteers and really engage them in our missions. So let's kind of double click into this. Let's talk about the role of staff. Scott from Minnesota, my absolute number one favorite volunteer. Your role as a staff partner is to really work yourself out of a job in some ways. It means going from being a doer to being a manager. And so when you are an effective staff member in a volunteer staff partnership, you set your volunteers up for success. It's your job to really understand their time, talent, skills, interests, and abilities that they bring to the role, and then manage those volunteers, manage all of those attributes toward impacting your mission. It's really about understanding your volunteers' personal and professional motivations for volunteering, and then find the best role for them, the thing that they are going to be most successful at. And it's also your job to make sure that their volunteerism is tying to your mission. I don't want volunteerism just for the sake of volunteerism. I don't want people to volunteer just to say that they're volunteering. We really want that to impact the bottom line of all of our missions. That's why we're here, and that's why we're leveraging volunteers, and that's why this work is so critical. So if your volunteer says, I have a heart for painting coffee mugs and I want to give these to cancer patients, that's a lovely aspiration, and I celebrate and cheer them on for that. But here at American Cancer Society, that's not our mission. That's not what we do. Our mission is to improve the lives of people with cancer through advocacy, research, and patient support. Their idea of volunteer work maybe doesn't align with our mission, and that's okay. It's okay to say no to a volunteer. My job as their manager includes managing the expectations about what our mission is and what it is not. And if they don't align, then it's okay to either find a different role for them or even find a different organization for them to serve in their best way. I've also found, when we are doing volunteering just for the sake of volunteering, right, and we're not tying that back to our mission, sometimes we can have a wrong person in the wrong job. And then we are preventing the right person from getting in that right position. We're really denying them the opportunity or move your mission forward. Like I said, no volunteering just for the sake of volunteering. We really have to be the manager and the resource to these volunteers to make sure that the work they're doing for us, it's absolutely vital to what we do, but we've got to make sure that it ties to the mission. And so that's our job, is to be the manager and the resource and not the doer. But then there's the role of the volunteer. Your job as a staff partner is to make sure that they are successful, like I said before, to understand what makes them tick, what is their motivation, and then to find a meaningful volunteer role for them. So volunteers, as we talked about, they bring their time, talent, treasure, and network, again, in support of the mission, not just to say that they're volunteering. It's our job as their manager to put those skills to work and be that good volunteer manager. It's their role to use their skills for good. It's their job to provide different perspectives. It's their job to challenge status quo and bring innovation and ask why not? Why do we do it this way? What if? What about? So JD from Washington, again, my 100% favorite volunteer. We have an annual volunteer meeting every year. He is the world's best production volunteer. He knows the script backwards and forwards. He serves as our voice of God for our volunteer event. He can work with our production team and make sure the lights get turned on at the right time and the music has got the right cue and we've got the script and the PowerPoint all synced up together. Is he going to ever go and ask for a $5,000 sponsorship? Probably not. That's not his job as a volunteer. It's my job as a staff to know what makes him successful and know how he can impact our mission. And so in this way, we can work together and make sure that he is successful in what he's doing. He's the best voice of God you've ever heard. And he is happy and fulfilled in his volunteer role. And again, it is impacting the mission of the American Cancer Society. So again, my job, manager and a resource. His job is to be good at what he's good at, honestly. And I think that that's such a key and beautiful and critical part of that partnership and that culture, is really making sure that our volunteers are successful and they were successfully managing them as those volunteer staff partnership managers. So moving on, let's talk about how you can set yourself up for success. So I always like to think beginning with the end in mind, and that starts with really an evaluation. So what's the status of our organization or our event or our volunteer program? Where do we want it to be? And how can we use volunteers to get there? What are the skills, behaviors, and attributes we need to get us from point A to point B? And once we have really done that program evaluation, then we can really develop meaningful volunteer roles. So roles that are going to, like I said, impact the mission, roles that volunteers are going to be happy and successful and fulfilled at, and roles that are going to help us get from where we are to where we need to be. I think along with that role development, I love a good job description or a good role description. I am big on managing expectations. And so, new volunteers, especially those leadership level volunteers that come into the organization, I want them to feel like they have a very clear sense of what the expectations are, that they know what their duties are, that they know who they report to, that they know, when they're expected to come to meetings and what they're expected to do at those meetings, that they know what resources are available for them to be successful, that they know, when things are not going right, what do we do? What's the plan B? And so I think along with that job description is really always being able to provide a feedback loop. Here at the American Cancer Society, we do an annual volunteer engagement survey. So we survey as many volunteers as will answer us, and ask them about how they feel about volunteering here at the American Cancer Society. But I think that that's something probably honestly, even it would be more streamlined if we were a smaller organization. And so I think that's a real opportunity if you are a smaller shop to be able to offer some sort of feedback or evaluation or survey for your volunteers to make sure that they're getting the support and the resources that they need. Then we talked as well about career pathing, right? Identifying who's kind of rising to the top and how can we help path them into the next level of their volunteer journey? How can we find something even more strategic for them to do, even more responsibility and even more empowerment and engagement in our mission? And then I think the real secret sauce that we do at American Cancer Society that I just can't recommend more highly is a partnership agreement. And so a lot of times we will call this a volunteer staff partnership agreement, just a partnership agreement. You might have seen this called like a social contract in some ways. But really, a volunteer staff partnership agreement just lines out how we work together as volunteers and staff. And so when I onboard new volunteers, I like to tell them, we are about to be married to each other for the length of your volunteer tenure, and these are our wedding vows. And so over on the left here, you see my very most favorite volunteer, Kim from New Jersey. Are y'all getting a theme here? Kim from New Jersey. She served with me as an MC for one of our volunteer events. And so when we first sat down together, we went through what are your duties and responsibilities as an MC for this event. Of course, she's got other duties and responsibilities with other staff partners. She's a fundraiser, she serves on her local board, she helps in a variety of different ways. But when we work together, what does that partnership look like? What are the duties that you have? What are my duties? What's your responsibility? And what's your responsibility to me in this partnership as well? We also want to identify how and when do we communicate with each other? Is it okay for you to call me at night, for you to text me during the day? Should I email your work email or your personal email address? So we really intentionally line these things out because again, these are our wedding vows to each other. We talk about our strengths and weaknesses. Maybe Kim was a committee chair for me and she says, gosh, you know what I'm not really good at is public speaking. I don't really want to lead these meetings. I can say, I understand. I'm happy to fill in knowing that that is a weakness or something that you don't feel good about. If y'all knew Kim in real life, you would know that that is not a weakness at all. But it's something that we can talk about. So I understand how to be that better manager and resource to that volunteer. We talk about expectations. When is the meeting? What do I have to do when I get there? What are like do I need to provide you a report either for a meeting or on a monthly cadence? What does that look like? What resources are available? Are there trainings or onboardings that she could take to make her effective in this role? What ways am I going to support her? Are other volunteers going to support her and even other staff partners as well? We talk about recognition. And so if you have been on this call series with Sydney, as I mentioned, you probably got to see my partner in crime, Michelle, talk about our recognition program at American Cancer Society back earlier in the spring. And so that's a big one too. Does Kim, my volunteer, want to be pulled up on stage and given an award, or would she rather die? Would she like a handwritten note or a gift? How does she like to be recognized, and make sure that I am fulfilling, again, my role as her manager and her resource? We talk about deadlines. We make sure that we are all on the same page about when things are due, what they need to look like. And we really do spell this out in a document. Like, absolutely, it's a conversation. But I think there is really something to be said for putting this in a document, writing it down together. I mean, you can even have a volunteer sign this if you want to at the bottom. It's not like it's a legal document, but I think it does just lend a sense of credibility that, like, we're in this together. We're going to be in partnership, and we're going to be working together. And these are, again, these are our wedding vows. This is how we have agreed to this partnership. So you don't have to do a partnership agreement or a partnership contract with every volunteer, but I certainly recommend that you do this with those volunteers that you have a one-to-one relationship with. So your event chairs, your committee chairs, your board chairs, your leadership volunteers, whatever that looks like, people that you'll be working closely with for a long period of time. Other volunteers that volunteer work for us, whether they are delivering programs to your clients, fundraising, whatever that is, I think there can be a very skinny down version of this that includes kind of those expectations and roles and responsibilities in whatever onboarding you offer. And so maybe that's a video that they watch. Maybe it's a class that they sit in. Just the idea that there is some accountability here, that we are in partnership together, even if we don't see or talk to each other every day. But there is that volunteer staff partnership culture, and that we have that level of trust and accountability with each other. Pause for just a moment, because there are going to be times where we have to have difficult conversations. And I like to say there are no difficult volunteers, there are only difficult relationships. But you may have heard this, talked to about, gosh, I've got such a difficult volunteer. I don't know how to manage this difficult volunteer. So I would really encourage you to reframe this as, it's not the volunteer that's difficult, it's maybe the partnership that's difficult. But I think leaning on a strong volunteer staff partnership culture can definitely help us get through some of those difficult times. I'm a firm believer that most volunteer difficulties and challenges can be managed by having a clear and open dialogue about that partnership. So, what's working and what's not? I always like to tell staff members, it really is about activating that leadership courage. You know what needs to be said, probably. And so it's really just taking that next step and leaning into your courage to have those conversations. Again, going back to the idea of a partnership agreement, if we have that on file and we have that in place and we've discussed these expectations, then it makes it so much easier to go back with that volunteer and kind of revisit those expectations, and be able to identify where we've gone wrong, where have we gone off course, and how can we get back on course together. Brene Brown always says, clear is kind. And I always believe that when we're working with our volunteer partners, that we have to be really clear about what's not working. How did we go off track? And how can we get this relationship and this partnership back where it needs to be? And I think anytime that we have to have one of these difficult volunteer conversations, it's critical that we focus on the mission. The mission is more important than me. It's more important than Melissa, my volunteer. It's more important than our partnership. And so our mission really relies on that successful partnership. And so wherever we can, it's really up to us to preserve that relationship and move forward in a positive and a productive way. I also feel like having a volunteer code of conduct is a great tool in your tool belt. It's a great resource. We at American Cancer Society have a mutual code of conduct for volunteers and staff. And so sometimes we know a volunteer may do something that goes against our organizational policies. In some terrible cases, they may do something that goes against the law. And so I think it's really important to have that code of conduct in place, so that when things go a little sideways, when maybe a volunteer does not follow our expectations or our agreement, that we can kind of lean back on that. I think it's critical that we have a clear plan in place for how to disqualify a volunteer if it gets to that point. So a code of conduct can really help us identify those ground rules for volunteers. and make sure that, it's not as in-depth as that partnership agreement, but it's really the very basic rules of engagement. And so if you've got a code of conduct and you've got a solid partnership agreement, for the most part, I think that you're going to be okay when you have difficult times arise, and you're going to be able to work through some of those things. So finally, I do want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, and I've already seen some great feedback in the chat. I am delighted to be happy to share this with Sydney for the follow-up, but just some resources that I think are really helpful in developing this culture of volunteer staff partnership. So if you have LinkedIn Learning or you have access to that in some way, I think there's a couple of great courses on LinkedIn about how to manage and lead a diverse team. Obviously, a lot of our volunteer teams are diverse, and we need to really lean into that and stay, up with the times and the best practices, and how can we be that effective manager and resource. A couple of courses about successful communication. So if we do have a volunteer staff partnership that's going a little bit sideways, how can we set ourselves up for success in managing that? Also a course on LinkedIn about skills to build stronger work relationships. I think that's super critical, whether you're working with volunteers or other staff, no matter what your industry is. A couple of articles that I have leaned on. They're from a couple of different sources, but difficult conversations with volunteers, managing challenging volunteers. Again, I would tell you, maybe it's not the volunteer, maybe it's just that relationship that's being challenging. A great article about engaging volunteers as partners. And that's what we've been talking about, really that partnership, that they have an equal seat at the table in our program development. And then 3 books that I always go back to on my bookshelf. Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High. I'll actually flip us back one slide and tell you that Melissa, who you see in this slide here, actually just helped me develop a training course for our staff about crucial conversations with volunteers. And it was so lovely because she was able to bring that volunteer perspective and say, in times where I've been in these difficult situations, this is what has or has not worked well for me. And so this was the book that we relied on, Crucial Conversations. But I think that's another great example of how, Melissa is a fundraiser for us. She's involved in our advocacy work, but also she can be that strategic volunteer and actually help deliver training to our staff partners, because we just have that level of trust and empowerment and engagement with Melissa, and she's been such a great volunteer for so long. So that's actually the book that we based our training off of, is around Crucial Conversations. Another 2 that I love, Influencer, The New Science of Leading Change. I think as volunteer managers and as volunteer professionals in our organization, there's always an opportunity for us to do a better job of being those change champions and really helping to get those results when we're working with volunteers. And then the Oz Principle, if you've not read that one, it is kind of meaty. It's got teeny print, I feel like. But some of the themes from that book will definitely stick with you, and really how to manage that individual and organizational accountability. So bringing it all together, this is Scarlett from Florida. She is literally my favorite volunteer. The high points that I want you to take away from this is that the volunteer staff partnership is a culture. It's not just a relationship. It really, for American Cancer Society, it really influences everything that we do. Like I said, we don't make decisions without volunteer input. Volunteers don't do work without staff guidance. And I think that is really one of the beautiful things that have kept me here at ACS for 20 years. I just love this idea of this culture and this relationship. Remember that staff and volunteers have distinct but equally important roles. Scarlett has a seat at the table just like I do, just like all the other volunteers that I've showcased today. They're not more or less important than I am as staff, but they have an equal seat at the table. They are equally as able to give their opinion and ideas and feedback as I am. And really what I want you to take away from this is that by strategically leveraging volunteers at every level of your organization, you can transform your mission. By relying on volunteers as strategic partners, you can transform the way that you do business. Because I promise, volunteers are smarter than you are. They're smarter than I am. And so when we can get their time, talent, treasure, network skills, and abilities to really lean into our mission strategically. Like I said, I think that it will really transform your organization. So I hope that you found this helpful. I'm going to take a moment and read through some of the feedback in the chat. I've loved your reactions. I'd love for us to stay in touch. Here's my email. That QR code will take you to my LinkedIn. I would love to stay connected. I'm really passionate, I hope you can tell, about volunteers, number one, but really this idea of volunteer engagement and not volunteer management. And so if you also are passionate about that and passionate about strategically leveraging volunteers and engaging them, I would definitely love to stay connected and see how we can elevate this whole body of work. So again, it's not just about volunteer management, but it's really about volunteer engagement as a skill set, as a profession, and as a passion, as it is for me, like I hope it is for you. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to read through the comments here, but I would love for you to put feedback